I love terrain, and quite simply, it's what sets the scene for any of our stories that we play out on the tabletop. The better the terrain, the better your experience, in my opinion. Another great thing about terrain, though, is that it's really easy to paint up quickly and have it look very good, which makes it a really nice palette cleanser in between projects, and also just something that isn't and shouldn't be that intimidating to take on. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Richard here from Crash Course Hobbies, and today I'm going to show you how to paint up a bunch of terrain in as little as an hour and still have it look pretty good. So with that, let's go to the hobby desk and I'll show you how to do it. All right, so we're over at the hobby desk now. I want to quickly just walk you through some of the supplies that you'll need to do this quick painting of terrain. So the number one thing I recommend is picking up some makeup sponges. You can get these from Walmart, you can get them from Amazon. I'll put a link in the description if y'all want to order some. You can get like 100 of these for like $5, so it's super easy to just pick some of these up. And then the main paints I like to use are just apple barrel craft paints. Again, you can pick these up for 50 cents a tube at like a local Walmart, or you can also buy a big bulk pack of them on Amazon if you don't have a store near you that sells them. Any cheap craft paint here should do the trick. And then we'll move on to the extra credit steps with the airbrush and inks and stuff later. You really don't have to do that though if you just want to knock out something quick. But here's what we're trying to emulate. This is some terrain that I've painted up previously for Firefight. This is some more Mantic terrain, but I want to build specifically just some smaller stuff for Deadzone, which is their skirmish game. So I've just got some smaller pieces. We're going to copy this same paint scheme, and I painted this whole building up in probably like a combined total of like 15 minutes. So I'm going to show you just how easy it is to get something like this really, really quickly. And this is very similar to the older video that I made, but just going to kind of do it a little bit better this time. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a couple of our makeup sponges, and they're just like little wedges. Now it's really important that you have some kind of sponge that has flat edges, because this is really going to help save us a lot of time by keeping the shadow color. So really what I would recommend is priming it black, or if you want to do like, you know, something that's Mars themed or whatever the shadow color is that you want, prime it in that color, because we're not going to color the recesses for the most part in whatever we have. So we're going to start with this black terrain here, and all I'm going to do is take a couple of different colors of my craft paint. To do this specific scheme, I'm using this pewter gray. I've also got this like pale sky blue, and I'm using that because I want to have slightly cooler tones, because I don't want it to look so much like rocks. I want it to look more like metal. So I'm going to be using that cool blue color to mix in with these grays, because typically I feel like a warmer gray is going to look more like stone, and a lighter gray or a cooler gray is going to look more like metal. So usually what I'll do here is I'll just take my sponge and I will mix it up until I get a color that I'm pretty happy with. I'm not super concerned with how it's gonna look on this one, and we'll just kind of get it started and see how it goes. So I've got my sponge here coated with it, and all we're gonna do now is take the flat end of it, and we're just gonna start dabbing lightly onto the terrain. Now if you'll see, by using the flat edge, we're not filling in any of those recessed bits. So this is going to help pick out those details really, really easily. And you will probably want to go through and do about 2 coats of this just to get a nice good opacity. Also, craft paint tends to dry a lot different in terms of color than like a mini paint would. And it generally tends to get a little bit darker. So you may want to go with another lighter bit. And you could also kind of start with a darker one towards the bottom and work your way up to like more of a highlight color. But we're just gonna go around and hit the whole thing with our gray. You'll notice I'm wearing gloves for this. It's definitely not required. I just find that if I'm gonna be busting out a bunch of this terrain quickly, I don't wanna wait for the paint to dry. And you can almost use the sponges to kind of wet blend colors together if you move really quickly. So just having the gloves is just easier for the mess, but definitely don't have to do it. This stuff washes off really easily. You definitely could use like miniature paints for this, but typically with terrain, you're using so much paint that it would just be really expensive to use your nice miniature paints. If you have maybe bought into a different collection and you have like old ones laying around that you just don't ever use anymore, sometimes I'll use those for terrain. But even then, I would kind of save it for the details and not this kind of stuff, because even a lot of this that we're doing with the sponges is going to get covered up later. So this is more just establishing kind of like a good base coat. All right, so now that we've got the base coat of the gray applied, I'm going to take my favorite color for this next step is burnt umber. Any kind of like darker brown will work just fine. This works as a good base for rust colors, as well as just kind of like a gross sort of build up on your terrain. So what I like to do for this is I'll get just a little bit of it on the more sharp, narrow kind of end of the sponge, wipe a little of the excess off on my glove, and then for this, this is pretty weathered and like kind of broken down and gross terrain. So I'm gonna do the same thing here. So gonna start with just kind of going from the tops here and do like kind of a little bit of like a runoff and just make it wider towards the top with kind of going down into a more narrow bit as if stuff's just kind of been dripping down it. And just gonna go through and kind of do that, and then also gonna go and start to lay foundations for where some rust is gonna end up going. So for that, you know, you can generally just sort of pick an area. So for this example, I might just kind of put a little bit down in this corner. So I'm just gonna kind of dab just like a little area here like this. It really doesn't have to be anything perfect, and you can really sort of kind of randomize it. Another thing I like to do is for this kind of runoff method is just put a little bit, anytime there's like a window or a specific overhang, it just looks a little bit nicer if you have it like where the water over time is kind of routed around it, and just makes it look a little bit more believable. And don't forget, if your terrain has two sides, do the back side too. Another thing I like to do with this burnt umber is it's really good for kind of simulating muddy boots. So for something like a walkway, I'll usually kind of just put the most traversed kind of areas of it with some of that, just as like a good foundation for it. So next we're going to start with a lighter brown. I'm going to use brown oxide for this. Really just like a warm lighter brown is good. And also going to use a very bright orange. Some of these craft paints tend to not be bright enough for rust. So when you get to kind of the last bit that you need, you can always switch to like a Army Painter dry rust or Rust Effects paint, or even just a little bit of mini paint. Something like that will work fine. Just something with a little bit more pigment to it. And so I'm gonna mix a little bit of this brighter orange into it to really kind of get that color that I want. Especially once this dries, it tends to mute down quite a bit. And so now we're gonna go through the areas that we have this darker color and just sort of reinforce just little areas of it with the brighter orange. Sometimes for this, what you can do is look at like reference images for what rust looks like, just to kind of help you, but in this case, we're just kind of going for it. So we're just gonna go through and add that in. Again, just take your time with it. You're gonna probably wanna do more than one pass with each kind of like layering in the brighter bits, because even like here, dabbing in this super bright orange, it will kind of mute down once it starts to dry. So we'll just kind of give it a minute and see what it looks like. We'll go through and just take this mixture of the lighter brown and hit these kind of rusty patches that we created. Let's find that glue. Whoa! What are you doing in here, you little sneak? You know what? That's not even important right now. We got bigger things to talk about. 93% of you guys haven't subscribed yet, so what are you waiting for? I'll make you a deal. You subscribe, and I'll let you out. And you really can go pretty quick with this. Definitely can go as fast or slow as you want. Now, I mentioned that you can also kind of wet blend this, and one way to really kind of show that is if you wanted to do all the rust in one go. If you take the darker, and we start with the darker first, say like that, and then we start to mix in the brighter color, and we just kind of dab it in as we go. Then we can really start to create this sort of like very rusty area. here. And sometimes if we get these more like dabbed in bits or like splotches that are really kind of bright and in your face, you can just dab it a little bit more and it'll blend in. And you know, like right now it's a little bit bright, so I might go through kind of more the center area of it with the darker and just kind of mix some of that in and go back and forth with it until you get something you're happy with. Generally when I'm doing rust, you know, for the purpose of the video, I'm kind of showing it step by step, but usually I'll do it this way and kind of work it back and forth until I get to a place where I'm happy with it and it looks pretty believable. So now on this specific terrain set, I've just got, because these are kind of like installation kind of buildings, so I just got little bits of red accents, and because this is the same terrain, I'm just going to go through and mirror those on there. I like to just have little bits of color in my terrain whenever I can, just to kind of break up the monotony and make it feel a little bit more real. And in this case, it just feels a little bit more, I guess, sci-fi too. Well, I prefer to use no brushes for the most part when I'm doing this kind of terrain. I'll just use sponges for just about all of it. You could absolutely use a brush if you want to have these bits cleaner, but any of the areas here, like where I'm getting too much, you know, dabbing it where I don't want it on the stairs, I'm just going to cover it up with rust. So I'm not super worried about it. One little tip I'd recommend on this step is don't drag the sponge, because then you'll create these kind of little smear lines that, I don't know, they look less natural to me than just dabbing. So even if you want to take a corner and just use it to kind of fill in this, just try your best not to drag it, because it will smear it and it doesn't cover quite as good. So it definitely looks a lot better if you just smush it and drag it. And like here, I've already kind of got the rust on this part of it. I totally forgot that I normally do this step before. That's fine. I'll just not put it on the whole way, and then I'll go back with just a little bit of that rust color and blend it in. There's no point in doing the same job twice. This is supposed to be quick. This is supposed to be easy. And that is exactly the goal here, because I want to get this terrain on my table today and get to be playing some Deadzone. All right, now with the red accents done on there, the next thing I like to do is take a darker green and a black, and this is just to add a little bit more grime, because this is sort of like an industrial thing. And also I just find that like little bits of natural colors in any terrain, obviously if you're making a board in like a purple landscape or something, then maybe go purple. But this green just kind of makes like a nice dark, very dark black green is kind of like a good grimy color. And also just, I don't know, the more colors you can throw into terrain, it just makes it feel so much more alive. So with this darker color now, I'm going to go through and hit like shadow areas or areas where like some gross, nasty water would have kind of collected and started to mold and grow stuff. So that's where we're going to start, in these kind of corner areas, and then sometimes, you know, I'll put like a little pool of it somewhere. We can also do the same thing that we did with these rust effects, the kind of like streaking down like that, and we could do it with our poop water that's kind of running down too. And then those will kind of look like, you know, all this stuff has kind of been sitting out for a long time and kind of accumulating all this nasty stuff. Again, underhangs, like anywhere that's kind of raised like this, I might kind of start to build it up under there. We can kind of stamp it over any of that red. You definitely don't want to leave the red afterwards untouched, because it's got to feel like it's part of the same world. Another area that's really great for this kind of pooling of the green is in stairs, really any corners that you can find, anywhere that we're going to add with shadows later. But if you don't have an airbrush and you're not going to do the extra step of that, then using the sponge to kind of reinforce any of these shadow areas like this will go a long way. You can see here it's really starting to come together. Again, no rhyme or reason to this at all. I mean, that's one of the best things about this method being so quickly, or painting so quickly, is like you really don't need to put too much thought in it. Just kind of blast through it, pick areas that look cool. If you don't like how it turns out with where you're putting stuff, just go back through again with your sponge and brighten it back up or fix it or do whatever you want to do. So this next part is totally optional. If you don't have an airbrush, you can skip it, or you can do this with the sponges just as well. But if you do have an airbrush, and I highly recommend you get one if you're getting into the hobby anyways, but here's what we're gonna do. Take a little bit of Liquitex black ink or black contrast paint, something like that. A little drop of flow improver helps it from gumming up on the tip. And then I'm gonna go through and just kind of really fill in some of these recessed areas to really accentuate it a little bit. And then I also like to pick out areas that are underneath windowsills or things like that, and then spray a little bit from below, kind of the bottom 20% of the terrain or so, which just kind of helps to kind of create a little bit of shadows and depth of your lighting there. And so you can see again, just going through and filling in these recessed bits and then picking out sort of this little underhang here just to create a little bit of a shadow. And by doing this, you really create just a lot of contrast in the terrain. Just like our miniatures, we want to have shadows, we want to have highlights. You can really create some interesting terrain very easily by doing this as well. I also like to hit any corners with a good spray of it as well, just to create, again, more of those shadows. And then on the inside, nobody's going to look at it anyway, so just kind of spray it there. And then sometimes I'll just blast, little parts of it here and there just to create a little bit of interesting color. Once we've got the black done, the final step is to just take some straight white ink and basically do the exact same thing, only the opposite. So I'll pick out areas of flooring that are exposed to the light just to create sort of a ping of light hitting that. And then any flat surface that looks like it's exposed, just spray it with a little bit of white ink. And because this is transparent, it doesn't really matter what color you have underneath the ink. It's just going to help brighten it up a little bit. And actually, white ink on terrain, no matter what the color is, and just some sort of tasteful accent spots can go a long way to making it pop. And this was something I was actually really afraid to do for a while because I just thought the white's gonna clash and not really look that great, but actually it can make a huge difference on having your terrain pop, and you'll just see how much of a difference is when we look at the completed set. Well, there you have it, guys. Terrain is one of those areas where it's super easy to just let your creativity fly and really create a world that you want to see manifest on the tabletop. I highly recommend you create a backstory or you come up with some kind of theme and allow your imagination to run wild. This is one of those areas where it's not something you need to overly obsess about or try too hard. I recommend just get yourself some sponges, get some inks, just go nuts and see what you come up with. Worst case, you can always paint over it, but don't be afraid to just give it a shot, go for it, and see what you come up with. And as we take a look at these final glamour shots of this terrain, again, remember this only took me about an hour to paint up almost this entire set. And so it really shouldn't be something that intimidates you, and instead let it inspire you and get you psyched up for your next project. Anyways, guys, that's it for this one. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, of course, you can continue to support me by subscribing, and just let me know what you think in the comment section. I'll have all the links for all this stuff if you want to pick it up on Amazon down in the description, but I encourage you to just pick it up anywhere that's the most accessible and easy for you to do so. So dollar store, Walmart, anything like that will work just fine for the majority of this stuff. And please continue to support your local hobby shops. And as always, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.